Back by popular demand from Bees, welcome to another episode of Blam Blam Chronicles. I am Beas. That is Bees. This is another episode in the DM or GM Chronicles. In regards to a game, we're going to talk a little bit about blaster, firearm, crossbow, safety, and how you can use that in a game. So, Bees, I'm going to let you start it off and take us away.
Not just in a game, but also in your writing. We talk about writing quite a bit here. We just want to let you know this is a pet peeve of ours because we've done the research. We know what the basic rules are for firearm safety and blaster safety in the Star Wars universe, or phaser safety in Star Trek. Laser blaster, whatever you want to call it. Pulse cannon for Optimus Prime. There are 4 rules of firearm safety in the real world, and if you follow those 4 rules, you will never accidentally shoot someone or something. So I want to go over those 4 rules with you, and there's some people who say there's only 3 rules. There's some people who will add more rules in that are just variations on the 4 basic rules. But there are 4 rules of firearm safety that should be translated back into your game, back into your story. If you're writing a story that involves firearms or blasters or anything like that, and people aren't following these rules, then it's going to come across as fake. You can only write what you know. You can only, play what you know as an actor. If you don't know about something, you're not going to make it feel authentic. And authenticity is how did somebody put it the other day? Authenticity is the currency of the new culture. That's all fancy talk right there. But what it comes down to is if it doesn't sound right, people aren't going to believe it. Or there's going to be people who do know about firearm safety who are going to be pointing out, that's not right there. And it's not going to come across as authentic to them. Which is also, for all you GMs out there, it's something you should be bearing in mind in your games. If you have games where there are blasters or crossbows or any kind of ranged weapon, then these 4 rules are going to apply. So I'm going to go over the rules real quick, which if I'm looking this way, it's because that's where my screen is. So rule 1, treat all weapons as if they're loaded. Always. If you assume that a weapon is loaded, let's just bring up my buddy here, Deathwatch Mando, who always has his 2 blasters with him. He always treats them as if they're loaded. If you assume a weapon is loaded, you'll never be surprised if it goes off. And we could clip in and maybe use Will to some firearm accidents on YouTube, or maybe some blaster incidents. My personal favorite, I just was rewatching The Rookie to catch up to the new season. And, what was the name of that guy from Heroes who was in it?
I have no idea. I've not watched The Rookie yet.
Okay, so he's only in for 2 episodes, spoiler alert. But the guy who is psychic in The Rookie's the fat cop. He wasn't all that fat, but he was.
The guy that's in all the J.J. Abrams movies and stuff. Yeah. Because I know who you're talking about. Played Matt Parkman in Heroes and
Thank you, Matt Parkman.
The pilot in Lost.
Yep.
Never mind. I'm not going to go through his IMDb thing, but yes, I know who you're talking about.
You can look it up. Tell us what his real name was. Anyway, he comes in as a rookie in season 2 or 3, I forget which. His very first day while they're in the briefing room, he discharges his firearm in the briefing room and gets fired. So he's got a cameo.
So he fires his gun and gets fired?
Yes. I do know how you can discharge a weapon that's in your holster, but his weapon was holstered and he managed to discharge it, which is not an easy thing to do. You have to be quite accidental to do that, especially with the holsters they had. That's very tricky. Because to discharge a weapon, back to rule 1, if you always assume the weapon is loaded, you will never be surprised if it goes off because you assume it's loaded. And weapons very rarely go off accidentally. That's in rule 3. Rule 2 is quite simply, keep the weapon pointed in a safe direction at all times. What that means is you don't want the weapon pointing at anyone, whether it's a blaster or a crossbow or a loaded crossbow, whatever. If the weapon can go off, never point it at a person unless you intend to harm them. Talked in the Lethal Force videos about the only time to legitimately, legally, morally use lethal force is to stop someone who is illegally and immorally using lethal force or threatening to use lethal force. So unless you're prepared to use lethal force, and go back to our videos and watch what we said about that, your characters should not be waving their guns around willy-nilly. You want to break out one of your blasters and...
Yep. I here have my droid blaster from episode 1, 2, and 3 of Star Wars. It's a super soaker. Notice the orange tip. Notice the very small handle for a child, so my fingers can't all fit in there. And Bees will probably talk about exactly what I'm doing in a second later. But
it's rule 3, baby.
So keeping weapons pointed in a safe direction. Now, Bees was specifically talking about people, but I'm also going to talk about things, because a safe direction isn't always just away from people. Good example is, we'll go in terms of a game or something like that. If you're going through whether it be, I don't know, sewers or an area that has a lot of gas lines and things like that, you don't want that to get shot either. If the weapon is pointed in a direction where it might possibly pierce or explode a gas line, that's bad as well. And, since we're talking about doing this in stories, if a character ignores that, especially in a game, it's easier to do in a game. You can actually make it have consequences because somebody is being silly or stupid. Now, in real life, sometimes you have to decide what is more safe. If your job actually requires you to handle a weapon or you're in that position. But in a game, generally, if you're giving somebody a warning, or in a story, if someone has gotten a warning, they should be aware it's there. And if you're like, okay, so there are gas lines running on both sides and above you, and then later you come across
or even
bad
if you're
guy,
at like a gas station.
But yeah, gasoline as well. Yeah, if you start firing shots randomly and something explodes, well, that's your player's own or character's own darn fault. But I just wanted to bring up the safe direction, because safe direction isn't necessarily always just away from people. Pretty much safe direction means this: pointing it in a direction where, if the firearm is discharged, because I know Beast doesn't want me to use the term if it goes off, if it is discharged, that it will not cause any sort of lasting damage, or the least amount of damage, so to speak.
That's why it's a safe direction, because nothing's going to get hurt if it goes off, if it discharges. That leads us to rule 3. Rule 3 is keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. There are variations of this, like keep your finger along the rail of the weapon until you're ready to engage. But it's the same thing. Keep your finger off the trigger until it's ready to shoot. A gun, a blaster, a crossbow that goes off without your finger depressing the trigger is a bad, or most likely broken, weapon. Guns do not go off by themselves. It's almost impossible. It's very rare. It has happened usually when the firearm is in a fire or some other catastrophe, or dropped from a ridiculous height. But if you're handling a weapon, it's designed to not go off unless you pull the trigger. It's modern firearms especially, but even old-fashioned firearms, even going back to flintlock, these rules apply to flintlock as well. What were you going to say, buddy?
You kind of touched on it briefly, but most modern firearms, and I'm assuming that in the futuristic state of Star Wars, Star Trek, and other things as well, they're what we call drop safe. Now, some older weapons may not necessarily be, and I wouldn't exactly trust a medieval crossbow to necessarily be. But in general, even if the weapon is ready to fire, if the trigger is pulled, if it is dropped, it should not fire. That's why in TV shows and movies and books. If somebody has a weapon and the police are like, drop the weapon, they actually mean for you to drop it. You know why? Because if it hits the ground, it's likely not going to go off. They would rather it be on the ground than pointed in an unsafe direction.
So one of the most egregious examples of this, one of the biggest flagrant violations, was True Lies.
True Lies. I knew you were I was thinking it the whole entire time.
I love that movie. It's a blast. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I think it's rated PG-13.
Mm-hmm.
Some hilarious lines, arguably Arnold Schwarzenegger's funniest movie. Jamie Lee Curtis and Arnold Schwarzenegger with Tom Arnold. Wonderful film, highly recommend it. But at one point in the film, famously, Jamie Lee Curtis's character drops a firearm, an automatic firearm, and it bounces down a set of stairs. And every time end over end, and every time it hits a stair, it lets off a stream of bullets, and she kills all of the bad guys in the area by dropping her gun. And that would never, ever happen in real life. Besides the fact that you actually do have to aim at something to hit it, the gun wouldn't go off like that. Not even a MAC-10, which were particularly volatile. So keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Keep it along the rail of the weapon, preferably, but as long as it's not on the trigger, the gun will not fire. The blaster should not fire. Guns do not go off accidentally. Almost ever. It is a less than 1% of 1% of 1% of times do guns go off without being depressed. And when they do go off without the trigger being depressed, there is a cause for it. Bullets do not spontaneously combust and fire.
Mm-hmm. This is also why you'll notice that most modern holsters don't have holes for you to put your finger on the trigger while it's still in the holster. I know that some people will, like, you might see, like, in some westerns, like, quick draw holsters and stuff where it's just bad. Because you don't want to actually touch that trigger until you have it, ready
in your
to
hand
fire.
And you're ready to fire and you've aimed. So if you're going through these rules backwards, so rule 3, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. So if you're ready to shoot, then you've already got the weapon pointed in a safe direction. So the weapon's pointed in a safe direction. That means, and you're ready to shoot, that means you're aiming at something you're ready to destroy. And you're already treating it like it's loaded. Rule number 4 is the one some of these lists I've looked up did not include, but it is important to include it if you don't want to accidentally shoot something. Before you start shooting, be aware of your target and what's behind it, because bullets are designed to go through things, including people. So that's something every good military person will tell you. Every good police officer will tell you. You need to be aware of what's behind your target in case the bullet goes through it. Taking a famous example from 3 years ago, Alec Baldwin, when he had his firearm accident on the set of Rust. The bullet killed one person and wounded the person behind them. That's a terrible tragedy. I'm not here to assign blame. I wasn't there. I'm not taking one side or the other, because there's more than one side in that. I have been following the case. I'll just say that it was a tragedy, obviously. Never should have happened. These people were not following the 4 rules of firearm safety. And because of that, 2 people got injured. And nobody should have been injured. He should have been treating that weapon as if it was loaded. He should have had the weapon pointed in a safe direction. If he had followed those 2 rules, then this wouldn't have happened. And even on set, when you have a gun that is, even with blanks in it, you keep it pointed in a safe direction, however you want to make your gun hand here, you keep it pointed in a safe direction. And that means you're not aiming at somebody down range from you on the set. All a blank is it's a casing with a little paper on top of it and some gunpowder in it. It may not even have paper on top. It may just be crimped closed with like a wrench or a special crimping tool. I'm sure they have special tools for everything. If he had that weapon pointed in a safe direction, even if it went off, by him pulling the trigger, then nobody would have been hurt.
There's a
They would have been.
reason. Oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. I was going to say, for all you truckers out there who want to look a little bit more at this, if you're kind of with what Bees is talking about here, if you're kind of a little bit more interested in getting into a little more of the nuance, I highly recommend looking at imfdb.org. It is the Internet Movie Firearms Database.org. It's like IMDb, but for guns. I mean, I'm just going to be honest. But you'll be able to see, like, they take pictures of various different weapons, and so you can see the different type of ones that are used throughout, various movies and TV shows. But one thing you'll notice is that they have typically 3, sometimes 4 types of firearms that they will use in movies. 1, actual firearms. 2, blank firearms that only fire blanks, whether it's an adapter or it's built that way so that it can only fire blanks. But, like Bees was touching on, blanks, because they are literally a cartridge casing that just doesn't have a projectile at the end,
but
when
it
fires,
does have gunpowder in it.
Exactly. All of the reactions that would normally happen in a firearm still happen, including, as you have probably seen if you've ever seen a weapon fired on TV even, the blast that comes out of the end of the weapon. Not the projectile, but just that fiery blast at the end of it.
The flash.
Yeah. And there's videos out there you can actually watch, that can still kill someone. In fact, it's happened.
We're releasing a gas of high temperature gunpowder, and it only goes out about 10 feet, 15 feet maximum from the end of the weapon.
Yeah.
And it's not enough.
It's still an explosion.
Yeah. It's not enough to it generally isn't enough to kill someone, though it can happen. It is enough to do serious heat damage to somebody. It's why you don't stand in front. It's one of the lesser reasons why you don't stand in front of a firearm when it's being fired.
But the other two I just want to talk about next is, I'm going to call it the wrong thing, but pretty much a flash paper gun or something to that effect. So they can get a flash off of it, but it's not actually no concussive force. It's not a blank firing. You don't see them as much. But then the last one is literally just a non-firing gun. It's literally just a piece of plastic, metal, wood, or whatever that's mocked up so that it looks like an actual firearm, enough so they can put it in scenes so that, now, we're states away from each other, but if I was in a scene and I had to point a weapon at Bees, there'd be no risk for it because it's not an actual firearm, so there is no risk. So even if in other cases, even if the armorer somehow had a live round in there or a blank round in there, if it is literally just a hunk of metal with no barrel and anything like that, it's not going to do anything unless I decide to whack him over the head with it. But
I highly recommend for all you movie people out there using the last one. There's no reason that I know of to not use a non-firing weapon now that we have computer graphics or whatever you want to call it, CGI. You can just add the flash in with CGI, which may be a little bit more expensive than actually it'll be a lot more expensive than using a blank. Blanks are cheap, but it's so much safer. There's no chance of an accident if all you're doing is pointing your fingers or your fake gun like Buse and going bang, bang, bang. Here, I'll use Death Watch Mando here. Bang, bang, bang. Nobody's getting hurt, which is the ideal way to do it. It's on a movie set. Why would you want to use blanks? But that's a different rant. This is for storytelling purposes and gaming purposes. If you want your stuff to feel realistic, follow the 4 rules of firearm safety, which are, without looking, 1, treat every weapon as if it's loaded. 2, keep your weapon pointed in a safe direction at all times. 3, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And 4, Be aware of your target and what's behind it. You follow those 4 rules, and you will never accidentally shoot someone. And if a character is not following those 4 rules in one of your stories, or a person is not following one of those 4 rules in real life, they are endangering someone else, and you need to respond appropriately.
Mm-hmm. And can
At
make for
that
some good
point,
storytelling, too, at that point.
yes, some very good storytelling. Going back to our episodes on lethal force, if someone is not following the 4 rules of firearm safety, then 2, guaranteed at least 2 of the 3 elements you need to use lethal force are present. And those 2 elements are the ability to cause lethal harm and the opportunity to cause lethal harm. Just because, and the fact that they are not actively threatening you does not mean that jeopardy does not exist. Because if they're being foolish with a firearm, it is your responsibility, or anyone's responsibility around them, to get to safety or stop them from acting that way, because they are
Mm-hmm.
endangering the lives of other people with their foolishness.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be part of your story too. That can be part of your game. If you don't respect this, it will cause harm. So that's our thing about gun safety, blaster safety. Anything you want to add?
Anybody who's been watching for a while, and I may edit this out, may know that I occasionally have a banner or a title that I'll put up when I've corrected Bees occasionally, which goes out, Buse is right, flashing across the screen. One reason I know you don't watch all the old episodes. So, I think in this time I need to put Bees was right, because I thought that this would not take as long to go through and that we could not make a full episode out of this, and I was wrong. So, this is me publicly, before I edit it out, apologizing to Bees.
This is a look behind the scenes, kids. Truckers.
But we appreciate you guys for watching us. If you stayed to the end and you enjoyed this, like it. If you disliked it, go ahead and hit the dislike button, but as we know, you don't mind doing that. Exactly. And write in the comments what you had issues with. Or, hey, list some TV shows, movies, or whatever where you have seen heinous weapons handling that you want to point out. And for those of you out there who are into swords and stuff like that, hey, point out some of those too. Any sort of really bad weapons handling. Mm-hmm. We all like to look at that stuff. But yeah, we appreciate you, and we will see you, truckers.